13, Matthew 16:13. It says, when Yeshua came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, okay, and this is this region. It's not necessarily saying right here, but it's saying the region of Caesarea Philippi. He asked his disciples, saying, who do men say that I am? Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? So they said, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Yeshua answered, and by the way, he called him Beni Ha-Elohim, which we've talked about that a lot yesterday, was the prophecy over Hosea that we would be Beni Ha-Elohim, we would be sons of God, sons of the living God. He said to them, but who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. Yeshua answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build, and a lot of English versions say my church. Okay? But then if you look at a Hebrew translation, it says my Bet Ha-Tefiliti, which means my house of prayer. Okay? And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So that's why people tie in, all right, they're in Caesarea Philippi, this is considered to be a gate of hell, so they kind of place that teaching right here. May or may not have happened. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he commanded his disciples that they should tell no one that he was Yeshua the Messiah. All right, so what does he mean by all this? You know, I've heard a lot of people teach about spiritual warfare. You know, this is an evil place. And he was talking about, you know, that they can bind and loose, you know, demons and this and that and the other thing. And it's about spiritual warfare. But you got to put everything in a context. And right before this teaching, if you go back to Matthew 11, he had just had a teaching on the loaves and his disciples didn't understand what he was talking about. So he says, right immediately preceding this, he says, how is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees? Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Okay, so he's saying beware of the doctrine of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and then it goes right into when Yeshua came into the region of Caesarea Philippi. Okay, so that's the context that we're talking about. He just taught them a lesson on the doctrine of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and then he brings them here to drive the point home. So what exactly was he teaching? Well, you've got this gate of hell here, and it's considered, like I said, to be a portal or a gate to the underworld. And in Hebrew, we're talking about Sheol. Sheol was the grave. Everybody went to Sheol when they died. The righteous, the unrighteous, everybody went to Sheol. The question is, what happened after that? And of course, that was the issue of the day. The big debate between the Sadducees and the Pharisees was whether there was a resurrection or not. Okay, and of course, Yeshua answered that question by his own resurrection. And yes, indeed, there was a resurrection, but that was up to debate. And that was one of the issues here, because they're talking about Sheol, and then he talks about the keys to heaven. All right, so the gates of hell, or the gates of Sheol, are what would be keeping people in, not out. Okay, and so the question is, Yeshua was saying that I have the ability to get you out of Sheol, that there is a resurrection, and through that resurrection, that my house of prayer, those that are in my house, will come out of Sheol. And so that was one of the big things he was teaching through that. Not about spiritual warfare, that we have to go to war with all these demons and all these false gods that are here. It was the revelation that he was the Messiah. I mean, that's what happened here. He was the Messiah, and through the Messiah, there would be a resurrection, and that those who believed in him, those that were part of his house, those that were the sons of Elohim, would be released from Sheol. In fact, here's what we read in Revelation 1:17-18. He said, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead, but he laid his right hand on me, saying, fear not, I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades, it says, or Sheol. So he answers it in Revelation. He completes the teaching that he started here, that by his own resurrection, he holds the keys, and those in his house now can exit Sheol and have life everlasting. All right. So that's the essence of that teaching here. And then he goes on, but then the spiritual warfare stuff goes on because he talks about binding and loosing, okay? And then you have to continue to put it into context. He's saying, beware the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, okay? He's saying, so beware of what they're teaching. And that's where binding and loosing becomes very important to understand. It's a Hebraic concept. It's not talking about binding demons or anything of that sort. This is a Hebraic concept called Aser Wehetir, okay? And I just took a quote from Kaufman Kohler, because he really explained it perfectly, and I didn't need to paraphrase it, so I'm just going to read it to you. He's Aser Wehetir is the rabbinical term for forbidding and permitting. The expression aser, to bind herself by a bond, is used in the Bible in Numbers for a vow which prevents one from using a thing. It implies binding an object by a powerful spell in order to prevent its use in some of the Targums and such. The corresponding Aramean shera and Hebrew hitir for loosing, the prohibitive, have no parallel in the Bible. The power of binding and loosing was always claimed by the Pharisees. Under Queen Alexander, the Pharisees, says Josephus, quote, became the administrators of all public affairs, so as to be empowered to banish and readmit whom they pleased, as well as to loose and to bind. This does not mean that as the learned men, they merely decided what, according to the Torah, was forbidden or allowed, but they possessed and exercised the power of tying or untying a thing by the spell of their divine authority. So this is what the Pharisees believed. Just as they could, by the power vested in them, pronounce and revoke an anathema upon a person. The various schools had the power to bind and to loose, that is, to forbid and to permit. And they could bind any day by declaring it a fast day. The power and authority vested in the rabbinical body of each age, or the Sanhedrin, received its ratification and final sanctification from the celestial court of justice, according to them. So, now you understand that the Pharisees and the Sadducees thought they had authority to permit, not to permit, in other words, to interpret the Torah, okay, to say what's permitted and what's not permitted according to the Torah. So now Yeshua is saying that he's giving his people. Let's go back and put that into context now. Okay. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So essentially, he's telling his people, his followers, those in his house, the power to bind and loose. So he just warned them to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees, and now he's saying, I'll give you power. And of course, what did he do on Shavuot? He sent the helper, he sent his spirit to those that followed him. And so those with his spirit, those in covenant with him, now have the power to bind and loose, which took them outside the realm of and the authority of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and established what he said in here, his house of prayer. So now he was establishing not a new church, not a new religion, but by his authority, he was basically doing a reset in Israel and saying all these that are supposedly in authority right now, they don't have the authority. You have the authority. I'm giving you the spirit to exercise that authority. So that's what it's all about. And I thought it's always good to bring you to the place where the teaching was done and put it in its proper context. Wow. Okay. Awesome. So we got a few minutes, and we can amazing. Maybe I would encourage you just to kind of walk around here if you want.